How are you? Nice to meet you, finally, after all the back and forth.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Thanks.
So now, here we have Barry Frechette. Is that how you pronounce your last name? Frechette?
Yep, that's right. F-R-E-C-H-E-T-T, Frechette.
Yes, and you work for Connolly?
I do. Yeah, I'm Director of Creative Services at Connolly Partners here in Boston.
Oh, and what do you do?
I manage the production department. So we're a mid-sized ad agency. We do everything from TV spots to websites to content, print ads. So we kind of do it all for all different types of clients. So
we're talking about when we dropped the bomb on Japan on August 6th at 8:15 a.m. So the 12 prisoners were Durden Looper, James Ryan, Hugh Atkinson, John Long, Buford Ellison, Norman Brissett, he was from Lowell, Massachusetts.
That's right, yeah.
Joseph Dubinsky, Julius Molnar, Charles Baumgartner, Raymond Porter, and James John Hatchell, and Ralph Neal.
That's right.
So these 12 American prisoners of war, soldiers of war, it says here that they came from the Lonesome Lady. They parachuted off of the airplane. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
That's right.
Their airplane got shot down, and it was called the Lonesome Lady. You know how they do those things that they paint on the side?
Yeah.
So they got shot down, right?
Yeah, of the 12, there were 4. They all come from 4 different airplanes. 2 were B-24s, the Lonesome Lady and the Tallowa. There was an SB-2C, which is a Helldiver. It's a 2-seater Navy plane. That was Norman's plane, along with Raymond Porter. They flew and took off from the Ticonderoga, the carrier, and then 1 smaller fighter that was shot down. And they were all shot down in a few battles right at the very end of the war on the 28th of July. And Hiroshima wasn't really known for as a place they brought prisoners, but given the fact that a lot of these attacks and bombings were in the Kure Harbor and around Hiroshima, it naturally made sense to bring them there. Unknowing to them, certainly, that on August 6th, the U.S. had targeted Hiroshima as the first atomic bombing. So they're from different flight crews, but they're all part of different battles, all leading up to August 6th, and obviously their flight crews were all brought together.
And this man, Maury, we'll call him Mr. Maury because his last name is kind of hard to pronounce. Mr. Maury was 8 years old at the time of the bombing, and he survived it. And as he got older, I guess he was smart in school, and I think in the film it says that he was researching one of his relatives' death and accidentally came upon, what was it, papers of the American prisoners of war and what happened to them in their last days over there after the bombing. Is that right?
Yeah, he had, Mr. Maury had come across some documentation and then also images that are hand-drawn but depicted people that were there that were not Japanese. And he started doing more and more research, and as he dug into it, he realized that there were Americans unaccounted for, and in some instances confirmed that were killed there. But it really, for some reason, something clicked in him, and he decided it was important that he delve in and find out what happened to the Americans that were killed there. And through his research and making these connections, he was able to determine that there were 12 and confirm that there were 12.
Yep.
But came through all different connections, going to villages and talking about what they saw and confirming what happened there, and going to some of the archives and pulling documentation there. And eventually his bigger goal really was to make sure the families knew, if they didn't already have some of that information, but also to reach out to each one of them and find a way to have their loved ones, or the POWs, recognized as victims of the bombing. And that means being registered as a victim of the bombing in Hiroshima. So he was able to make all those connections over the years and actually get all 12 registered.
And who were the two that, wasn't there two that he contacted that went to Japan?
Yeah, the film, we focused on the Brissett family and the Neal family.
Did they all come over, or was it just those two?
No, just those two. It was it's kind of a big effort, and you know, in the film we talk about Ralph and Norman, the Brissett and Neal. They actually survived the day and were able to survive for 13 days before succumbing to radiation poisoning. So there was a reason why we sort of focused on those two, and we brought a niece of Norman and a nephew of Ralph.
Right, and weren't they told that they were missing in action? Is that what it was? Like, do you know if that's all they knew?
Yeah, they both
They got a knock on the door, and they received the letter. Is that right?
They did, yeah. They both. I mean, obviously, it would have been, you know, family members. Both Ralph and Susan weren't around at the time, but they did. They had received letters that were missing in action and unaccounted for.
So they really didn't know what happened to them at all.
No, not at first. I mean, those two families, of the 12, some had gotten information, you know, secondhand. Others had gotten letters of witnesses who had seen Americans there. But for some of the families, it would have been years before they got real information about what happened to them. So.
Right. And Mr. Morey, he was very smart, and he took it upon himself to study. He spent 40 years researching about what had happened to the POWs.
That's right.
That's just amazing, you know.
Well, you know, I think he was struck by it because he felt, you know, through circumstances, he survived. He was only 8, but what he witnessed was terrible. And if he hadn't just recently switched schools, he would have been right in the hypo center, and he would have probably have died. So I think he felt that these airmen, most of them, died immediately, and they didn't have a voice. And I think he took it upon himself to give them that voice. And he's a special guy. I mean, there's hundreds of monuments in Hiroshima that surround the area, and they're all to different groups of people, of course, but there's only one for the Americans, and Mr. Morey put that up there, and he worked a second job to do it, and he felt dedicated, and he felt this passion to make sure they were remembered like everybody else. And he's a special guy to do it. Because a little later in the film, we realized that 30 years after the war, a witness actually drew a picture of Norman and Ralph coming out of the damage and being escorted back to another facility, and they obviously survived. And in an image that has lots of destruction and figures that look Japanese, there are two tall American figures. And
okay, let me just ask you.
Sure.
So did he see I thought it was him that talked about he saw them in the prison, and that he talked about their blonde. He thought that all Westerners had blonde hair and blue eyes. Was that Mr.
No, that was an eyewitness actually.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, my mistake.
Yeah, Dr. Nakamura talks about when he was just a kid, he got to see the prisoners the night before the bombing. So.
Oh, okay. All right. My mistake. Sorry about that. So where did they land? I mean, so they parachuted out of the bombers, and where did they land? Right.
Yeah, I was saying the 12 American airmen came from different airplanes. So there was 2 B-24s, the Taloa and the Lonesome Lady, and the Navy's SB-2C, which is a 2-seater bomber. That was Norman Brissett and Raymond Porter, and then another smaller fighter. So what had happened, there were a lot of attacks around the 24th and 28th of July in that area. So when these planes were shot down, their crews were gathered and brought to the closest big city, which was Hiroshima. And I don't think anybody certainly realized that the United States had that on the list to bomb on the 6th. So.
Right, yeah. And he described that night when he was 8 years old that he was inside the mushroom, and he remembers it very vividly. He remembers that it was pitch black, and he tried to hold out his hand in front of his face, but then he said gradually the black cleared and he was able to see around him. And that he was petrified that more bombs would be dropped and run off. So I guess he went to the mountains, I guess, towards the mountains. And then he spoke about all the bodies on the road, and he was running past people's faces. I mean, I can't imagine being an 8-year-old child running past all the dead people. Horrific, you know?
Yeah.
And then he was saying a lot of people were sticking their hands out of buildings because all the buildings were crashed down.
That's right.
To be saved, yes, yep. And people everywhere were pleading for help. And all he could do as an 8-year-old was cry, unfortunately. And then eventually somebody offered him shelter. And then, like, oh, I guess a woman's hand reached out to pull him into an air shelter.
That's right, yeah.
And he was safe for the night, I guess. And he said the night was glowing, the city was glowing with major fires, like you said, throughout the city of Hiroshima. And then the worst thing imaginable that I never would have even thought of, he said that wild dogs came from out of nowhere and started eating the dead bodies, which was horrific. You know, that's horrible.
Yeah, they were just sitting in his kitchen having that interview. There were a lot of long pauses where I could tell he was kind of going back to these moments, and you could tell they're still raw for him even after all this time, and they must have left such an impression on him as just an 8-year-old kid. And he remembers the bodies were buried, and
eventually they dug like 7 ditches, and they buried them and stuff like that. They burned them, actually, that's what he said.
Yeah, a lot of them.
And I guess the families in order to recognize their loved ones, would open the mouths to search for gold teeth in their mouths to you know what I mean, identify their loved ones. I didn't know that either.
It was hard. I mean, families were separated, as you can imagine, and a lot of them were unrecognizable. Some terrible things that I'm sure everyone had to witness. So
Right.
It just shows how frankly terrible war is. So.
Yep. Let's see here. I guess 2 of the American soldiers jumped in a cesspool to escape the thermal flash near the military compound where they were being held.
That's right. That's where I think the story of bringing Ralph and Norman together. Ralph Neal and Norman Brissett, for some reason, were separated from the other 12, and they were able to survive the initial blast. And I know how close they were from the epicenter or the hypocenter, and with the firestorm swirling, they were able to jump into this water. We'll call it cesspool, I guess, but it's sort of a collection ditch right near the Hiroshima castle, and they were able to ride it out there with 3 hours just with their faces above. And it's it's just over that wall in Hiroshima castle, upwards of 5,000 people were killed instantly. It was really depending on where you were at the time of the blast. So they survived for 3 hours, and eventually that afternoon were collected by other Japanese military police and brought to different holding areas for the next couple of days. So.
And I guess when you get radiation sickness, you vomit green vomit, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah, the initial blast obviously had an incredible death toll, but they found that 13 to 20 days later, many of the survivors, or at least people who were there, began to come down with radiation sickness, and it really breaks down the internal organs, and it's a terrible process, but it does involve mucus from the eyes and from the nose and bile. It's just it's an awful thing, and you can just imagine at the time no one really knew the side effects and why this was happening, because it's the first time any kind of atomic weapon was ever used. So I will give a lot of credit to the Hiroshima Peace Museum. I think a lot of their documentation and the process and how they documented what happened was important, because I was able to talk to folks there and understand exactly what Norman and Ralph had gone through. And I don't say just Norman and Ralph, it was everyone really. But they really suffered.
Right.
And it was a hard thing to listen to.
Right, and I guess, as you said before, Mr. Maury would have died had he not changed schools.
Yeah, that was his belief.
He just changed schools, and we hear this story over and over again with different soldiers. Had I not done this and that,
Yeah, one wrong turn or missing an alarm clock or something, and your life has changed. So
Right. So the Japanese had this beautiful, and I love this. I absolutely love this ceremony. I don't know what it is, but there's something about floating lanterns on top of a water. It's just so peaceful. They have this ceremony where they make lanterns and then they write messages to their loved ones on the paper, and they put it in the water and they light the candle and they let it float.
it's after so many people went to that river to find relief, and in doing that, many of them passed away there. So it was a way for a lot of folks to come back, and the imagery of floating a lantern, the purpose is it's meant to help the souls move on, and it's very powerful to be there in person, because it wasn't where the morning ceremony and the remembrance was a little more solemn, and I think there were lots of emotions there. I think the peace ceremony at night was very powerful and very moving, and in a positive way, because there was all these moments shared by families and multiple generations. And in our case, we had a survivor on the Japan side, along with a bereaved family member from the American side, and placing a lantern in the water. I'll never forget the moment, but it was very special, and it's very moving, and to see them all there, it's a great experience. And they do replicate that ceremony in a number of places. It's come to symbolize peace more than anything else. But around the August 6th, I think, we've seen some around here in the state, I'm sure, do it, and it's a wonderful moment, a wonderful sentiment.
Right, and it was moving to see them, what was it? What was his name? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. It would have been Ralph, and Ralph Neal was there along with Mr. Maury. So
right, and it showed it all. Did they walk them through their last? What happened? Like where they actually took them, where they landed on the land, and it shows them where they went on their last moments.
We did. We actually brought Susan Brissett-Archinsky from Lowell, Mass, and Ralph Neal at the time was in Kentucky before he just moved recently. We brought them to Mr. Maury and what Mr. Maury had done, and there were different times. When Susan was in March and Ralph was in August. But what Mr. Maury did was he brought us to follow in their footsteps. So where did we talk to an eyewitness that saw the attack on the Tone, which was where Norman was shot down, and then we actually went to the village for Ralph, where the Lonesome Lady crashed and Ralph would have been recaptured. And then we went, into the city and talked to folks who saw them, and we kind of retraced everyone's steps. And I think Mr. Maury knew everybody and knew the details and knew their story, and I think it was really important for him to share those moments with them.
Yes, I can't imagine the impact it had on the loved ones of finally, figuring out what they went through and what their last moments were like. That must have been closure, brought much closure and peace for them,
It was, and there's a image in the film, and there's actually a photo taking of Ralph and Norman. They were after they passed, they were buried, and I think there was some great care taken to their grave sites. And I think that left an impression with both Ralph and Susan that there was such great caretaking and respect given to, even in the moment, days after the atomic bombing, that they were actually buried with that kind of respect shows there's an important humanity there, even above all the terrible things that war can bring. And 70 years later, to go to that site and see, where they died, and to be with a Japanese survivor and an American family is an important lesson.
Right. I think that he did this. I think it also helped him heal from the war as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't, if you do that much research, do you know what I'm saying? It probably was a bit of a therapy for him and made him feel well, healed from that horrific thing that happened to him. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think he moved to make a difference, and he knew these families didn't really have voices over there. So, and in Japan, they didn't know what happened. They didn't know the stories of 12 Americans. So, I think he felt by giving their voice, he was passing their story along, and I think that's important.
It is. It's a wonderful story, and I guess he was saying that he hopes that he prays that we will never see, that there'll be peace. That he prays that the whole world will see to it that it won't happen again. And I think that was another reason why he did what he did.
Yeah, he's witnessed it. And
right.
he's understood the pain on both sides.
Right, and didn't President Obama, didn't he honor him? Did President Obama go to Japan when they had the 70th anniversary?
Yeah, it was the first. President Obama actually went over in May of last year, the first sitting president to do so, and Mr. Moore was lucky enough to be part of that ceremony and actually got to meet the president, and Maury's accomplishments were mentioned in the speech, and it's a big deal for a man who really wasn't looking to be recognized, but frankly deserves it. So
right.
We're very proud of him.
Yes, and President Obama, former President Obama, gave him a hug, and he started crying. I mean, you can just see. I mean, any soldier that sees war is just so, emotional about it, and I can't say I blame them, but it was touching to see that he gave him a big hug after shaking his hand.
Yeah,
so that was a nice.
It was a powerful moment for all of us, and we're happy for everybody.
Right, and now you entered this into the Arlington International Film Festival. In 2016, correct?
That's right, yeah.
And how did it do?
I did great. I love the venue. I thought the films there were fantastic. We were so happy to be there on a Friday night. And the audience that were there were really receptive to it. We had some really good questions and answers after it. I always loved that part of it.
Right.
And I think it was a great time for the film too. It was the first time we got to share in a sort of festival setting the new cut that had President Obama in there. So yeah, it was a wonderful event. I loved it, and
that's great.
I was very lucky to be part of that.
Awesome. And I just want to let everybody know that they open the venue now for anybody who wants to submit their documentaries or any sort of film. That they are welcome to do so. Now, are you planning on doing any more films in the future, or was this just?
Yeah, this is my first one, so we loved it. Everybody involved with it, Max and my co-director and partner in crime, and Chad certainly did the music, and Peter Grilly, and really the whole gang. We love doing it. I think if there's another opportunity for me personally to do one, I'd certainly be up for it. I think it really comes down to finding that right story. I think I'm attracted to stories that that focus on an unsung hero and somebody that should be recognized. So we'll see. I love doing it, and I still think, we're still screening the film now through this year and looking for distribution. So, it's a great place to be in.
Awesome. And I just want to thank you for this interview. Oh, let me just say the music. I loved the music. No, seriously, it was nice. Perfect to go Japanese instrumental. It was beautiful, actually.
Yeah, it's a beautiful mix.
Nice job on the music.
Yeah, Chad Cannon did a wonderful job. Maya Fujisawa, who sang certain parts of it and sang the theme song at the end. And, folks want to hear it. It's on Spotify and iTunes, so you can go find it. Just search for Paper Lanterns documentary and you'll find it. But it is really wonderful, and it helps bring the pictures and the story to life. So
it does. It suits it to a T.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you once again, Barry.
Yeah, we did it. Thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, and it was lovely to meet you. And we look forward to more films and stories in the future.
Thank you very much.
All right. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.